So I guess what's really interesting is that, I mean, obviously we've been talking about relationships, different stages of relationships, the different stages of our lives and how they evolve over time. But with that, what's really important is to feel emotionally and financially secure at every point in those changes. And what I want to do in this next half hour is kind of build some clarity to allow you to feel that confidence, because to have emotional security and financial security really is the bedrock to be able to have strong relationships. And so what I want to do is begin by inviting each of our panelists to just briefly introduce themselves, say who they are, what they do, and what you do to help your clients, because this is very much on the professional end of these are the people who are able to help you to navigate life at whatever stage you are in those relationships. So I'm going to begin with you, Lisa.
Sure. Hi. So, can you hear me? Can you hear me all right?
You've got this one too. This one might work better. You have to have it turned on. Did you do that? No, you didn't.
Oh, there we go.
Right, okay. Never mind. There we go.
User error. So, hi, I'm Lisa Henderson, and I work at Evelyn Partners, and I'm on the investment management team there. So, what we do really is to, at the firm, we have both investment managers but also financial planners. And what we like to do is really get to know our clients and take them on their own financial journey. So we meet clients from all sorts of walks of life. For the reasons they come to us are really very different. They may have, they may be in a couple, they may have sort of financially sort of had success at work, they may have sort of, come to us after a breakup in a relationship. So each and every client that we meet in person is very different. And I think we've got lots of colleagues in the room today as well, and what we're all trying to do is really sort of act with compassion and also just empower you to make the right decisions. Quite often it's a really daunting world, and building on sort of the first panel talk as well, in terms of the last 50 years. I've been working at Evelyn Partners for the past 20 years, and I have to say, quite often it does still feel like a sort of very male sort of dominated industry. So really what we're trying to do in the past couple of years particular is break down those barriers and just make it a much more approachable sort of area. So no question is too silly at all when we meet clients.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I think what's a really important stat, which I love, is that women now, and tell me if I'm mistaken, Evelyn, but women now control, I think it's 60% of UK and global wealth. So sort of feeding on the conversation of the last session, not only are we CEOs of our household, but actually we are CFOs as well. So actually we're in control. So it's really important that we've got the likes of Lisa to be able to steer us through those conversations. Imogen, over to you, welcome, and maybe you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, great, that's working. I'm Imogen, I'm a family lawyer at Russell Cook. For those that don't know us, we're a law firm. We've got 3 offices, Central London, Putney and Kingston, so we work with a lot of South West London based family. I deliberately say family lawyer rather than divorce lawyer, because whilst divorce is a large part of my practice, I work with people through all stages of their relationship life cycle. So it might be people who are buying a property with a partner that they're not married to and sorting out the ownership of that. Might be a prenuptial agreement, a postnuptial agreement, or a separation or divorce. And what I wanted to pick up on was the word that Lisa used, which was empowerment. And I see my role as providing all of my clients with the information they need to make the decisions that are right for them. Every one of my clients has a different, backgrounds, circumstances. What on the surface might look like a similar situation is actually very different for a whole number of reasons, not least their interpersonal relationships. And I am always conscious that I am not the person that is left living their life at the end of the day. And different people will make different decisions in similar situations. And as long as it's the right decision for them and they understand the context in which that decision is being made, that ultimately is how I see my role in helping them.
Super, thank you. And last Sara.
Hi everyone. So I've got the catchy job title of the divorce coach, and I help people to cope better with any kind of breakup, separation, divorce. I founded my company after I was catapulted out of my own marriage, did not see it coming, hit me like a freight train, did a lot of the ugly crying on the bathroom floor. I don't know if anyone recognises that, but phoning my mum at 2 a.m, she's the only one that would answer the phone. I found out literally overnight my husband had met someone else, he was madly in love, the affair had been going on for at least 6 months. Didn't help she was 12 years younger, didn't help she was stunningly beautiful, and it certainly didn't help that she was pregnant. We also worked together. We had 200 staff, an office in London and Australia, and it was pretty much just me and my PA that didn't have a clue of what was going on. So I then had to face the humiliation, the shame, the embarrassment, on top of the heartbreak and the betrayal. So having lived that, I was a coach at the time. I'd been coaching for 15 years, and I thought, well, I've got to be able to change how I feel. How do I do that? And therapy didn't touch the sides because it was non-directive. And as a coach, I wanted someone to say, Sara, stop doing that and try this. So I created all the tools that I was going to help me, and my son was only 1 at the time. I forgot to add that they moved into the penthouse above where I lived, and she was made a director of my business, but that's another part of the story. So I've got the badge really, and the t-shirt and the cap and everything else. So I thought, why don't I just create some tools? So I've done that. We now share them with the general public to help anyone dealing with that. And we have online free support groups, because that's what I wish I'd had. We have one-to-one coaches, have 2 of my coaches, Lauren and Emma, in the room today helping support me. And we also have some of the guys that are training in my coach training school. So we also train people to become breakup and divorce coaches, because my mission is to get these tools out so that no one has to feel the way that I felt. So we've trained over 800 coaches now across 30 different countries. And I'm really excited that we've now launched into businesses as well, and are supporting employees in the workplace as an employee benefit, and doing a lot of training. And my specialist subject is how to cope divorcing a toxic partner, unhealthy domestic abuse. I'm also the patron of a domestic abuse charity. I've written 4 books. I've got one of them here if you'd like to have a look at it, but it's Screw You, Watch This, How to Recover from Toxic Relationships, and that's my mantra. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. So an expert on many things. So we have 3 leading experts in the room, and what I would say to you, we're gonna just sort of scratch the surface in the next few minutes as we cover different topics. But what I would say to you, make sure you do take the time to talk to each of them, because they are the experts that can help you. So what I want to begin with Imogen and Lisa is, one of the things I find fascinating when it comes to your sort of sense of emotional and financial security is, I think a lot of the time you sort of start the role models in your life. What you've grown up with tends to shape the people that you are, whether that's around how you react to things emotionally, how you react to things in terms of how you manage your own financial circumstances. And by that I mean, if you've grown up in a really thrifty family, you then either react against that and you become a spendthrift, or your relationship with money can be really cautious. And the same thing, if you have grown up in perhaps toxic relationships, difficult family situations, you either react against it or you seek to emulate it. Whatever you have grown up with, I think you tend to either emulate or want to almost rebel against. So I guess it's what I want to start with, in particular with you, with Imogen and with Lisa, is sort of to work on that. The stories that we tell ourselves, I think, and the stories we grow up with often shape the people and what we become and how we behave towards others. So if you'd like to share your own story, your own journey of what does financial security look like for you, either yourselves or through the lens of your clients, and how does that help you to have the ability to have stronger relationships?
Sure, shall I start?
Yeah.
So I thought it was really interesting what Veronica mentioned earlier about seeing this sort of, not to segregate people too much, but millennials, Gen Z, trying to sort of do things differently to their parents. And that's something I see in my practice a lot, and that broadly, generally speaking, lots of my younger clients are much more open about having those conversations about money, and are, you know, a bit more, I was going to say savvy, I'm not sure that's quite the right word, but they're a lot more open to having those conversations. And one of the things I see with some of my older clients perhaps is that they have perhaps cast themselves in these roles in their relationships and during their marriages, and perhaps things have been run a certain way, or they've, you know, taken a back seat in certain bits, and they often come in and see me at the beginning, and they say, I don't know anything about our finances, or that's not really my area, I haven't really been the one that's in, and I've just sort of, you know, things have happened and I've agreed to it and I'm not quite sure where things are. And what I see a lot is people who have, and they're often very bright, generally women, often very bright women who have lost that trust in their own instincts. And actually, these are people who are incredibly capable, but they haven't exercised perhaps that muscle during a relationship, and they've really started to doubt themselves. And one of the best parts of my job is seeing them through that process, and by the end having that confidence, and they start trusting themselves again. And I think the really key bit of that from my perspective is what sort of helping them to challenge those sort of roles they've assigned themselves to, or those assumptions that they've made, often subconsciously. And part of that is making sure that they have that right team around them. So, you know, Lisa and her colleagues and the expertise they provide, and the sort of support, and Sara and other, you know, divorce coaches, therapists, whatever that team looks like for that particular client, and different people will need different things. But I think, as I said, I just think a lot of people underestimate and typecast themselves without perhaps meaning to, and it goes back to that empowerment and sort of letting people take back control a little bit.
Very interesting. Lisa, you.
Yeah, so sort of looking at my client base, really, you know, there are quite a few sort of, a bit like you were saying in terms of, you know, the age profile, particularly more elderly couples later on in retirement. There is that sort of more traditional sort of role of perhaps one person in the relationship having more control over finances, or sort of more understanding of them. But actually what we really try and do in that sort of situation is encourage them both to come in for the meeting, particularly if it's face-to-face or even online, actually, and participate. And I think part of our sort of my learning over the past, you know, 20 years over my career is actually involving both parties in the relationship. So because I think it's vital that they understand the implications of, you know, how are we investing their money? What is their, you know, getting both sides of what they're really trying to achieve from it as well. Yeah, it's really important, I think.
And in the last session, we were talking about the importance of connection, conversation. And I think, you know, there was a term that I was told about the other day, which is money conflicts. Why is it so important to have those conversations, and how do you start those tricky conversations? You know, particularly as you know, Annie was talking about in sort of multi-decade marriages, how do you just suddenly change tack? How do you start them and have those awkward conversations?
It's quite interesting because often in a meeting, you know, we might have been running a portfolio, or, you know, looking after a person's finances in a certain way for years and years, and then actually it's a useful space in that meeting to have that sort of I can be the impartial person raising those questions, and actually, particularly if one party doesn't feel as sort of empowered to have the sort of face-to-face at home, it's a useful place to just make sure, you know, we've got the same sort of outlook in terms of, you know, gifting to children or whatever it might be, because I think, you know, we really want to get that sort of equal sort of empowering point.
I attended a really interesting talk last week, which was hosted by Evelyn, where they launched a report talking about women and money and our relationship with it. And one thing I thought was absolutely fascinating is that I think often the narrative has been out there that women lack confidence when it comes to managing their money, managing their whole sort of finances and things. But actually, we're not. It's just that it hasn't necessarily been part of our lives, part of our makeup. And so I think what I'm hearing you talk about is that actually encouraging your clients to take those first action points builds experience, and then with that the sense of confidence, if that's what you want to call it, grows, and so it becomes relatable experience.
Yeah, if we act with compassion, I think, and really listen, I think that's part of our sort of, your learned experience of working with people, and really making sure that we are part of that sort of household team, if you like, in terms of being that sounding board about ideas. What are they trying to achieve together in their lives? I think, that's a vital role that we play.
I think also, just to come in on that, is removing this sense of shame. And actually I see that quite a lot when people will come into the first meeting and say, oh, I was probably really silly of me and I haven't done this and that. And it's, people live their lives, and people live their lives in the way that they have to. It goes back to this sort of, you're running your lives together, and you can't do everything at once, and there is no shame in that. But I think sometimes it builds up, and it's almost like that too scared then to make the leap. And I think, as Lisa was saying, starting with those questions. Okay, what do we want to do? What risk profile are we looking at? What's our long-term goal here? Can help just to open that door a bit. And once that door's open a crack, I think you can push it and people transform. I mean, I'm sure you see it in your practice.
Yeah, I mean, some clients who've maybe had a divorce sort of 10, 20 years ago, so we've taken them all the way through the journey, and it's just great to see them get excited about living another part of their lives again, and really just enjoy and not having to think about their finances, because that's our sort of job in their team. That's what we're doing. We're ensuring that they've got the income or whatever it might be, and we're sort of just facilitating that, I guess.
Absolutely. So Imogen, it's not just about helping people through separation and divorce with your work, but you're also about helping people to plan across their life. Can you sort of share some of the things that people might want to think about, and some of the things you come across in your practice in terms for planning across life, whether that's prenups, cohabitation agreements, which of course cohabitation now is the fastest form of arrangement. You talk about some of the things that you come across and you would suggest that we might want to be thinking about, either for ourselves or for young adult children, to be sort of building into our planning processes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge part of my practice, and it's been growing, I'd say, really in the last 5 years. We've seen a huge increase, as you say, with cohabitation rather than marriage becoming, growing exponentially. There's a lot of misunderstanding about cohabitation, and my poor husband he works in insurance, and the number of times I have ranted at him about the fact that insurance forms still ask you if you're a common law husband or wife, and that's not a thing. It doesn't exist. There is no such thing in England, and I don't know why insurance companies are intent on perpetuating it. I'm going to give you all the rant now. The relationship planning, and as I say, often the place where we're seeing it a lot is it seems to me anyway, a lot of lifetime gifting, and Lisa will know about this better than I will. Lots of people wanting to hand down wealth to their children, to hand it down to the next generation, to help them buy a property, to help them set up a business, to help grandkids through school fees, and all of those sorts of things. But actually, these are people who are passing on wealth that they have built up over really hard fought and successful careers, and actually wanting to protect that and wanting to understand that if hopefully their child's relationship doesn't go south, but if it does, how do we ensure that money is protected. And there's a whole host of things we can do. Prenuptial agreements people are perhaps getting a bit more familiar with now. They're not quite the American film style things where, you know, if you have an affair, then you get nothing and you're out on the street. England's a little bit more concerned about needs than perhaps some American states. But declarations of trust, buying properties with partners or perhaps family members. We're seeing lots of co-investment, regulating those relationships at the beginning to avoid having a messy situation at the end, whether that be the breakup of a romantic relationship or a, you know, familial relationship. You know, brothers and sisters and siblings that own properties together, nightmare when people want to get money out at different times. So there's all sorts of things we can do, and I think what often people don't realise is that we can be quite creative within that, and so it's always worth having a conversation if you are thinking about gifting, both from the sort of tax perspective but also from the legal perspective. And, you know, different arrangements will be different for, you know, will be right for different people, but there are a lot of options out there.
Thank you. So Sara, you talked at the beginning, you're a divorce coach. Now, I think it's an entirely new sort of sector that has emerged. And we all know about divorce lawyers, we know a little bit about financial wealth managers and financial planners. But tell us what a divorce coach does and how that role interacts with the lawyers.
Yeah, well, divorce coaching didn't exist when I was going through mine, which is what I really felt I needed. And it's about helping support people through the emotional roller coaster and the practical challenges that you face. Now, we don't give legal advice, we don't give financial advice, that's definitely not our lane. So that's why we work very closely and in partnership with Evelyn and Russell Cook and other firms. But we are really there for the individual, because a lot of the professionals in, say, the family law, or, you know, they're very reassuring, can be highly empathetic, but that's not enough. As you guys who have been through a divorce, anyone here? Yeah, quite a few. You'll know that you need more specific. So we will listen and we will help, but it's different to therapy because we're much more directive. So we'll come up with ideas, and at the end of every session, you'll get an action plan of what you can do next, and you'll make leaps forward with that because it's fast, transformational coaching. It's not, let's talk about it and see how you feel, because there's other therapists that will do that. We are coaches, which is very much more getting you from A to B as safely as we can, but we are specialists in every area. So, for example, how do you hand over your child to your husband and his new 22-year-old girlfriend? Like, that's going to cause pain and trauma. And what happens when you shut that door? So we have specific tools and strategies for every different scenario that you're going to come across. Turning up at parents' evening on your own. You know, there's a name badge for both of you, and you know that one never turns up, but they still keep putting the badge out, yet you're the only one that's been going for the last 10 years. That's not me, obviously, of course, but you know, it's those specific things. And also, you know, things like how, you know, court can be really intimidating, and choosing a lawyer, choosing a financial investor, they're very intelligent people. And sometimes if you've been, especially in a toxic relationship, you haven't got the information on how much money you've got, and you've got to maybe sit there in front of these people and tell them, I have no clue how many bank accounts we have, or what's in that account, or I don't know what a share is, I don't know what my pension looks like, do I have one? They're really difficult conversations. So whilst we don't give that advice, we'll show you how to show up and how to pick the right professionals. Because in my personal opinion and experience, there are some to be avoided and some to be welcomed and embraced, like the guys we've got on the stage. But again, we've got to be very careful we're picking the right people for you. So again, we're behind the scenes supporting on all those different scenarios, but very specific to breakup, divorce, and especially toxic relationships and how to navigate that.
I was just going to say, to pick up on that point, something I say to every potential client that I speak to is, this is one of the most personal things you can go through, and having the right team is so important. And I won't be the right solicitor for everybody, and that's fine. And it is so important to have somebody that you can trust and you can have those conversations with. And it might be, you know, they often talk about, if you're looking for a new therapist, try out a few different, see who you connect with. And there are lots of very good family lawyers out there, and because somebody's the right fit for your friend or your neighbour doesn't mean they'll be the right fit for you, and that's fine. And I would just really echo what Sara says about finding that right team and looking at those resources.
And especially, I think it's important to add that if you are divorcing someone and it's toxic, that you need a very different team to the team that you would go for if it's an amicable, healthy relationship dynamic. Because post-separation abuse is one of the biggest misunderstood issues we have globally, actually, but definitely in this country as well. And so you have to make sure you have the team, both financial and legal, that really get what you're going through. So again, these are big decisions you're making. And if you're not sure if it's toxic, the question to ask is the word compromise on the table? Because healthy, you're going to argue even in a healthy dynamic of a breakup, and have disagreements, but you'll be both working on the premise that you're working towards some sort of fair compromise at the end of the day, and you're going to have to make a sacrifice, and so are they. Whereas if you are divorcing someone that's, abusive, a perpetrator, toxic, they will be focused on total annihilation at any cost, emotional and financial. And so compromise isn't a word that's on the table. So that's a quick way to sort of figure out if it is healthy or unhealthy.
Let's just sort of, dig a bit deeper into that in terms of the abuse. Because of course, domestic abuse is not just limited to physical abuse, it's emotional and financial as well, as you're alluding to. So tell us about the signs that you need to see to spot that, and I guess in sort of briefly, how and why people get into these relationships. What are the red flags to look for?
Well, there's a lot that I can say on that topic, but in a nutshell, I think first of all, there are so many things. Abuse is not. We call it domestic abuse now. We used to call it domestic violence, which led to this misunderstanding that if you had a black eye or a bruise, that was abuse. If they were hurling abuse verbally, that wasn't. So now it's abuse in this country, not in the States. Still, they call it violence, but it covers physical, emotional, sexual, financial, and we see this all the time. And it's rarely just one. And actually, a very chilling statistic, which I think is important to raise because of risk. 30% of domestic homicides in the UK happen within 3 months of separation. And in 80% of those homicides, there was never any physical violence before. So that is where the escalation of your risk as you pull away from an abuser comes. So even if they've never hit you or been violent or anything like that, going back into that environment after you've left can be very dangerous. And this is something that I train family lawyers, financial advisors as well, because sometimes people leave and go, I'm going to go back because now I'm out, I'm going to get stuff for the kids, or I'm going to go back and have a conversation, or I left stuff there. Again, in some cases that's absolutely fine, but just being aware of the advice that you're giving is really key, because it can be, life-threatening. So going on to how do you spot the signs? Well, lying, gaslighting, confusing behaviour, isolating. So it won't happen on the first weekend that you're with them. They won't say, let's not see your parents. They'll probably say, well, I'm a bit tired this weekend. Do you mind if we skip it? But that will, over time, become more and more of a, I'm not going to see your parents, why would I want to do that? Same with your friends. Are you sure she's your friend? Really? Don't really get that vibe. And then over time, you'll see that you don't want to spend time with them because it's obviously causing problems at home. So you isolate yourself in some ways from them. So there's lots of different signs, and it's not a one-off. Abuse is not one incident. Someone loses their temper or calls you a name. This is consistent and persistent over a long period of time, which is why we don't see it coming. Because when we go to your point on how do we get in, it's amazing, right? The love bombing is incredible. It's what we dreamed about, what Disney showed us that we should all be aspiring to. They turn up, they make us feel $1 million. We're the best thing since sliced bread in their world. Grandiose promises. And then slowly the mask starts to slip over a period of time. But that will be infrequent at the beginning. And then over time, that will become more and more. But at that point, you're isolated, you might be financially dependent, you might be married, you might have kids. It's much harder to leave. So that's why we get in and we stay, because remember, we fell in love with this amazing persona that they presented. But that was just a perception they created to hook you in. But when you've fallen in love with that, you're always living in the hope that well, I know they can be amazing, so I'll just wait till it gets back to that. So there's this cycle of abuse where there's an instance that could be violence, it could be a name calling, it could be gaslighting. And as that happens, you start to pull away because you're like, well, this doesn't feel right, I'm going to shrink away here. And then they hoover you back in by either telling you, you're mad, well, that didn't happen like that. Or they might say, I'm really sorry, it's never going to happen again, or I'm having a bad day, or my parents were abusive. So again, they'll pull you back in, or even, this happened to a client the other day, she woke up the next morning after a huge row, he was throwing things at her, and she was terrified, so she went to bed, and he slept in the other room, and 9 o'clock in the morning, Saturday, comes in, whistling, tray of breakfast and cup of tea, and as if nothing had happened. And she was like, I didn't want to say anything because thank God we were back to nice person I'd fallen in love with. I didn't want to rock the boat. So again, you go round in circles, and that's the cycle of abuse and why we get in and why we stay.
And Lisa, do you want to comment from the perspective of financial abuse?
Yeah, I mean, it quite often is when, you can clearly see that one side of the couple are making lots of decisions, and the other half just doesn't have much of a say on things like that. And quite often you can see, particularly, it's much easier in a face-to-face meeting to sort of witness that. But actually, they're almost wanting to say something, but they're just silent really, and they're just sort of going along with it. That tends to come out in that way, and then maybe after the meeting, or you get a separate email or something just to kind of voice their opinion that way, because they don't feel able to when we're all together.
Yeah, and I also see the people that think, but they're looking after me. That's their role. They tell me, look, you're not very good at that. Let me look after that, or that's my role in this relationship. So quite often, and I know this, I was guilty of this. I was like, oh well, if you want to do that stuff, that's not really my thing. But after a while, I knew nothing about anything, and I became completely dependent on him. But I never thought this would happen in the end. So quite often we're compliant in the fact that it's like, yeah, okay, you do that, and I'll do the other stuff, So it's not always choice.
Now, I said at the beginning that that some conversations might cut quite deep. If any of this is cutting deep, and Sara's here with experts of in her team, and we've also got Chloe Udis as well, who runs a divorce coaching practice. So if any of this is resonating and you're finding challenging, remember they're here, and I would suggest you do take that opportunity to chat to them in the break. But thank you for that. And I guess, Sara, I just want to sort of close that topic with just sort of one suggestion you would make that if someone is experiencing that, what they could do to protect themselves.
First of all, boundaries are important, but it depends whether you're in the relationship or you're out. If you're still in a relationship with someone that's abusive, please do not start asserting visible and obvious boundaries, because this will escalate your risk. So you're better off maybe jumping on one of the free support groups and talking it through to get tailored to your specific situation. If you're outside of it, it's about getting educated and getting your own, people on your team like Evelyn who can sort of explain to you the stuff you don't know in a way that you go, oh, okay, so I'm not an idiot, I can understand this. And the clarity gives you power. So we often stick our head in the sand because it's easier. But actually, if you understand it and you can have a team of people like we have here explaining to you, well, okay, I know you don't know it, but let me explain it, that you feel more empowered. So get educated, I would say, helps a lot.
Thank you for that. So I said we'd just scratch the surface. There's a lot we haven't covered, but I hope that has been of use to you. And I wanted to sort of finish on a sort of positive note about that envisaging your future, about rebuilding, if it is post a difficult stage in your relationship, whether that's separation or divorce. And to each of you to share a piece of advice and insight, a takeaway to people here, where it's about feeling secure, feeling happy about being able to embrace this next chapter. And begin with you, Lisa.
Yeah, so I would say that, when you've got time to think for yourself, whereas before you might have been prioritising children or the rest of the family, actually just identify what your own priorities are in life, what your own outlook really is, and what you're looking forward to doing, and what you used to enjoy doing that maybe you haven't had time for recently. Make time for that.
Make time for you. Thank you. Lisa, Imogen, sorry.
No problem. I mean, I echo that, and what actually the first panel was talking about, and the sort of the second stage or the third stage of life, and using, divorce, however, quote unquote, well you do it, and however supportive your team is going to be a huge, seismic change in life. But I think if you have that right team around you, you can, as you transition out of that, dealing with all the professionals and the logistics and the, legalities of it all, is, it gives you an opportunity to decide, what do I want my life to look like? What's important to me? And looking at that second stage, perhaps with some excitement.
Very nice, thank you. And finish with you, Sara.
I think for me it's knowing all of those things and knowing that you've got this, you can do it. And I know, especially in the early stages, it can be dark, it can be overwhelming, it can be terrifying, it can be humiliating. However, it changes when you make the decision. Don't give your power away and wait for someone else to come save you. This is where you get to save yourself. So the motto, screw you, is not to your ex, although some of you I know it might be, but it's more to the old you that tolerated that. So screw that old life, and watch this is where it gets that fire in your belly going, where it's like, watch this, I'm going to turn my life around and I'm going to focus on the good stuff and what's coming. And that makes a massive shift, which creates momentum for you to go on and be happier and more confident than you've ever been before. So it's totally possible having that belief and knowing that you've got this.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we give our panellists a real welcome? Thank you. Well done.